Washington Heights, a neighborhood in northern Manhattan, is known for many things. Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical In the Heights, the assassination of Malcolm X at the Audubon Ballroom, the birthplace of baseball star Alex Rodriguez, the Morris Jumel Mansion, and Fort Tryon Park, home to the Cloisters. The neighborhood's use of architectural metals is not one of them. Unlike other Manhattan neighborhoods like Soho, which have been esteemed for their architectural metals, Washington Heights has not been widely acknowledged for its metalwork, despite the fact that the George Washington Bridge and landmarked Little Red Lighthouse both represent significant metal achievements. Today, we take you on a virtual walking tour of a focus area in Washington Heights, West 179th to West 182nd Streets between Fort Washington Park and St. Nicholas Avenue, to highlight both the monumental and mundane architectural metal that has helped characterize the neighborhood over time. Washington Heights was the last neighborhood in Manhattan to urbanize, developing mainly from the 1890s to the 1930s. The neighborhood has been occupied and developed by immigrants since the late 19th century, with waves of Irish and German immigrants in the early 1900s, Holocaust refugees in the 1930s and 1940s, and Hispanics starting in the 1960s. Most of the neighborhood has not yet faced major redevelopment, allowing much of the historic fabric to survive. Thus, the neighborhood has and continues to be characterized by 5 to 6 story apartment buildings dating to the early 19th century, many of which retain their period, character-defining metal ornament. Most of the visible architectural metals in Washington Heights were used for exterior ornamental purposes, although it's worth noting that some buildings have interior steel structures or metal piping. Perhaps unsurprisingly, one of the most common uses of metal in the neighborhood is fences. Though this fence outside 497 West 182nd Street is accompanied by a modern painted handrail of an indeterminate metal, likely for ADA compliance, the historic portion appears to be wrought iron. This conclusion is based on the delicate swirling ornamentation and rough surface, which is indicative of hammering. However, the floral detail on the newel may be cast iron. The mixing of iron types for fences is not uncommon, as in the case of this tree guard on West 180th Street. The majority of the tree guard appears to be cast, but the newels appear to be steel, which is an iron alloy. While at first glance the circle detailing and balusters may appear to be wrought, they're welded together. This fence, surrounding the McNally Plaza World War I memorial, though, appears to be composed only of wrought iron. As it has a delicate and simple design, it would likely not have been cost-effective to be constructed of cast iron. Not all fences, though, were made of wrought and cast iron. This simple fence at Congregation Sha'arei Hatikva on West 179th Street appears to be made of early steel. Its component parts are too thin to have warranted casting, but its sharp angles and welded pieces, which compose the Star of David, indicate that it is not wrought iron. Decorative window and door grills are also common in Washington Heights, and they frequently resemble the fence styles in the neighborhood. This particular window grill at 563 West 182nd Street, which has quite a bit of rust, appears to be made of steel. Also note the mailbox of 563B, which appears to be made of sheet metal. By contrast, this decorative door grill at 624 West 182nd Street is likely wrought iron, which you can discern from its delicate curves, non-smooth surface, and the use of rivets. The paint on this grill of a raised basement on West 180th Street makes it a bit difficult to discern the metal that it's made of, but it looks to be made of wrought iron. Note the similarities between this grill and the last. One style can be embodied with different types of metal. Sometimes, though, you've got to look up to find metal on buildings. In Washington Heights and much of New York City, you'll be able to spot many decorative sheet metal cornices, just like this one. You might not always be able to identify the metal, though, because they're so high up. This cornice at 1441 St. Nicholas Avenue is most likely galvanized steel, which was very commonly used for cornices. Note also the elaborate painted wrought iron fire escape, another prominent use of metal with steel ladders below the cornice. The rust on this cornice at 617 West 179th Street, though, suggests that it's probably galvanized steel. Keep in mind that many cornices have been removed from buildings in Washington Heights and beyond. This sheet metal and copper cornice at 4220 Broadway appears to have been removed due to deterioration and safety concerns, judging by the extremely poor condition of the remaining portion of the cornice. cornice could have been removed due to deterioration, as evidenced by the adjacent, likely galvanized steel cornice, or it could have been removed for other purposes, such as the need for scrap metal in World War II. Copper is a prominent metal in the neighborhood, whose presence is typically given away by its recognizable verdigris. In addition to being used in some sheet metal cornices, you'll find it being used decoratively on the tops of buildings, as seen on the cupola of St. Spyridon Greek Orthodox Church on Wadsworth Avenue, or as flashing, also seen at the Greek Orthodox Church or at 1334 Riverside Drive, but the keen observer can find it in other places as well. Looking for verdigris might help you spot brass throughout the neighborhood, as brass is an alloy containing copper and zinc. The verdigris on this mail slot for Holyrood Church on West 179th Street and this lamp at the Fort Washington branch of the New York Public Library give them away as brass. You'll also spot brass on some plaques like the one at the entrance of the New York Public Library throughout the neighborhood. Although brass is cheaper, bronze is also used in neighborhood plaques, as seen on the 1921 plaque at the McNally Plaza World War I Memorial, whose fence we saw earlier. You'll find other uses of metal throughout Washington Heights as well, such as these rusted steel windows at Congregation Sha'arei Hatikva. It's also easy to spot lead in the neighborhood's many stained glass windows, like these at Holyrood Church. Beyond the characteristic ornamental architectural metals, Washington Heights also has two world-class metal structures. One is the iconic George Washington Bridge, built in the late 1920s and connecting New York and New Jersey. The structure of this steel suspension bridge is an excellent example of steel used for transportation purposes. Take a walk through Fort Tryon Park to get up close to the rivets on this bridge. While looking at the rivets, take a moment to look at the other jewel of the neighborhood's metal collection, the Little Red Lighthouse, officially named Jeffries Hook Light. Located under George Washington Bridge, the lighthouse is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and designated as a New York City landmark. It was moved to its current location in 1921 to improve Hudson River navigational aids at Jeffries Hook before the construction of the bridge. The body of the structure is made from painted cast iron panels with horizontal and vertical seams. Although the 1979 National Register nomination lists the panels as steel, the lack of corrosion on the body of the lighthouse shows that it's cast iron. The corrosion of the lighthouse's steel door demonstrates how cast iron is more corrosion resistant than steel. The porthole window openings, cut within the panels, are topped with decorative ornamental hoods, also made from cast iron, which would have been pre-assembled in a shop and brought to the site in one piece. The lighthouse's lantern roof also appears to be painted cast iron. The fence surrounding the lighthouse is described in the 1991 landmark designation as cast iron, but it's more likely raw iron or steel due to its slender pickets and absence of significant ornament. Definitively identifying the material on the fence would require further investigation, possibly with an XRF gun. As we've seen on this tour, Washington Heights has a diverse mix of architectural metals that contribute to the character of the neighborhood. Next time you're taking a walk through your neighborhood, remember to look high and low for architectural metals, both small pieces of ornament like grills that you may not notice regularly, and large-scale pieces of metal infrastructure like the George Washington Bridge. Metals are a key part of architecture. Stop and take a look all around the city.